Hello and welcome to the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast, where we discuss self-aware leadership with thinkers from around the globe. I'm your host, Nia Thomas. Join me as we talk to today's guest.
Today, I'm joined by Lisa Nordquist, and she's a certified health and wellness coach with accolades from prestigious institutions like Mayo Clinic and the International Coach Federation. As the founder and CEO of her own enterprise, Lisa brings over 2 decades of expertise in behavior change, mindset training, and program development to her clients. With a background in psychology and a plethora of certifications, such as a safe conversations leader and core dynamics coach, Lisa specializes in fostering emotional intelligence and refined communication for individuals and teams. Her book, Love Yourself Fit, earned her a silver medal in the Global eBook Awards, showcasing her dedication to promoting holistic wellness. Lisa's impact extends way beyond her business, and she's been featured on major media platforms like CBS News and ESPN Sports Radio, captivating audiences with her passionate presentations. So join us as we explore Lisa's journey and insights into building sustainable well-being and fostering productive relationships. Lisa, it's so good to talk to you today.
Thank you. What a wonderful introduction. And thank you for having me, Dr. Nia. I am excited to be here.
So tell us about these 2 parts of your areas of expertise. So you have fitness and well-being on the one side and psychology on the other. How do those 2 things go together?
Yeah, good question. And I actually get that question a lot of times from like corporate moguls. They're like, wait, fitness? What are you doing here? You know what? It all comes down to behavior change. Because a lot of what we're talking about in this sphere, you know, your guests, what I do, what you do is helping people grow to a newer, better level. We can give them a ton of information about that, but unless they choose to actually change their behavior, it's all for naught, right? So what we're trying to do, what I'm trying to do is actually get an adoption of new behavior and new mindset. So when I look at the spectrum, from that perspective, fitness and health and self-care and that behavior over the long haul is very similar to like taking on something like self-awareness or emotional intelligence. It's a limbic learning process in the limbic region of the brain. So it's going to have to be something that there has to be purpose behind. There has to be some internal connections in mindset to make it happen. And so my experience and background with fitness, I really was struggling with self-care my whole life before I went into fitness. And I realized that the things that we were providing as a society for people in self-care was extrinsic and all about the physical and wasn't putting the mindset stuff together, wasn't putting in the limbic elements. And so I came in and figured that out kind of for myself and started bring that. And that's what my book is about, is how do you get yourself to practice that stuff and make those changes long-term? And so that is then naturally carried over to me, to my real interest, which is people's internal, how they're operating, you know, in multiple areas of life.
I definitely see that connection because often when we talk about self-awareness, people ask me, where do you start with self-awareness? And I always say, start with mindfulness, especially if you're new to self-awareness, because you need to understand, how does your breathing change when you're stressed? How does your heart rate raise? And that is very fundamental to our operating system, isn't it? It's about how am I functioning as on the physical level, and how does that then impact the way that I operate within the workplace and as a leader, etc.
Absolutely. And, you know, there's this thing that connects the mind and body, the neck. You know, we've come from this in the Western world, this idea that we're separate, you know, that my mind is different than my body. And we know there's been so much research, especially over the last 40 years in this area. It's called PNIE, that connects our state of mind with our physical health. And to your point, things like, you know, pausing and meditation and becoming, you know, working those muscles, those mindset muscles, so that we can be more self-aware of what's happening physically when we're starting to have that emotional arousal. But both sides, to become more aware of the mental state we're in, the emotional state we're in, the spiritual state we're in, the physical state we're in.
Mhm.
is really a different way of thinking, I think, of the whole self. And that is really self-awareness, is checking in on your whole self of what's being triggered, what's my body doing, like you just pointed out, where are my thoughts going? All of it is kind of an awareness and thinking of yourself as a whole being. Because the
Absolutely.
reality is, like, if you're fighting with your spouse,
Mhm.
or you're going to have trouble at work, right? And
Yeah.
if you have
Yeah.
huge issues at work, you're going to bring them home. There's no separation, really. There's a inner connection within and without that's very prevalent. And I think self-awareness is really starting to pay attention to that.
Yeah, most definitely. And interested in how you describe self-awareness there. I'm of the opinion that self-awareness is bigger than just one thing. So it's bigger than emotional intelligence, which brings me nicely on to asking you, how do you define self-awareness and how do you define emotional intelligence, which you talk a lot about? How are they the same? How are they different?
Gosh, I feel like I want to throw that question back at you because you're the expert on self-awareness. But so I would love to hear more about what you have to say on it. But I do think so. Self-awareness in itself is that, to me, is that being aware of what is going on with me in all those areas, being like having a barometer, an internal barometer where you can
Mhm.
check on, ooh, where am I at with this? Why is this stressing me out? Why do I feel myself getting elevated in those maybe physical markers? They might be emotional markers, or it might be a mindset where you watch a politician on TV and you start to get angry.
Mhm.
That's BS or whatever. It's noting that. And then going a little deeper, hopefully with emotional intelligence on it, is where did that come from? Where is that coming from? I think we all sort of walk around with these VR goggles on, and we think everyone's has the same VR goggles. They
Yeah.
don't. We have our own thing we're watching from our childhood, from our experiences,
Yeah.
from our physiology. And self-awareness, I think, really is the foundation of, oh my gosh, I'm walking around with my own VR goggles on. And
Yeah.
then I think that EQ is, I don't think you can, it's kind of this funny thing. I don't think you can have emotional intelligence without self-awareness.
Yeah.
But you can have self-awareness and not the full gamut of EQ.
Mhm.
But I think if you're really like I don't know that there's a rating system, I would acquiesce to you on this, but you're really self-aware. It goes beyond just checking on self, and it goes into, how am I landing with other people?
Yes.
How am I coming across?
Yeah.
And being conscious of that, and then taking that into the fold of how you direct yourself and manage yourself.
Yeah, I think that's probably the description that I would give in terms of how is self-awareness different or how does it encompass emotional intelligence. And there is a really good example. I was talking to Gerrit Peltzer and he was talking to me about a politician who was hoping to pick up Angela Merkel's job when she had left it. And
Mhm.
he was spotted in I think it was a region that had had some significant flooding. And he was spotted in the background of a video laughing and
Oh,
laughing Lachette. So if you look it up on Google, you'll find
oh,
it. And for me, that is where self-awareness becomes different, bigger, beyond emotional intelligence, because your awareness of how you come across to others in that context, how
mhm.
does that impact your reputation and your future career chances in
Sure.
his situation? And that's how I see that there is a difference with self-awareness and emotional intelligence.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. In our world today, you need to be, especially as a leader, almost hyper vigilant about how you are coming off in multiple situations.
Mhm.
And then it can be almost really difficult to navigate. Like the cancel culture and, the world we live in where people are very hypercritical. It's hard to sort of please everyone. You have to
Yeah.
be authentic. You have to be aware of how you're coming off, for sure. And then I think that leads leaders to really look at what is my mojo going to be? What is my vibe? What is my pulse? And being authentic with that.
Yes. And doing it from a place of conscious awareness and choice. And I think that's the difference
Yeah.
because if you don't know and you aren't aware that others are aware of you and your impact on others, you're not in a position to make a conscious choice. And I think that's the difference. If you want to be laughing in the background of a video, that's fine. But as long as you know that the impact that that potentially has by the media that is looking upon you without understanding the
Right.
context.
Absolutely. Like, I hope you're a comedian leader, right? Like, you're
Indeed,
making
yeah.
other people laugh and relieving the stress of the situation or something, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit more about psychological safety. This is something that you talk about. How does it fit in with collaboration within teams and, well, innovation within teams too?
Yeah. So psychological safety is a beautiful thing. It's a newer thing. Amy Edmondson, at least newer in my purview, and her work on it has been significant. And I'm sure you're familiar with the Aristotle project that Google did with that.
Yeah.
And they found that there was just this tremendously strong link between psych safety on a team and innovation. I think what it does is it just makes it real. It makes a team real, where it is an environment when you have that going on a team. It's like this intangible, invisible vibe of it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to throw out an idea. It's okay to ask for help. All of those things at the same time. And I think it's to what we were just speaking about, it's sort of the opposite of the media world and the pressures of the world, is that you're under a microscope as a leader in the world. And it becomes very hard to step out of the box and create new things. But if you create a bubble in your team where it is safe to throw new things on the table, to question things, to disagree, then that creates a space where people can be real and they can be creative and they can interact at a different level that is outside of the box, because they don't have to stay in that safety. And I think that the way that you created it is you become uncomfortably vulnerable as a leader. You talk about your mistakes. You talk about how this feels uncomfortable to me right now to talk about this. You become authentic, real, and open. And I think that's really hard for leaders because they don't want to be vulnerable. They want to be, the tough person leading the way, I'm a Teflon. But the truth is they're human too. And when you end up talking and coaching with leaders the way I do, you end up seeing, oh no, they don't know how to handle things sometimes. They're scared. They're human too, right? So I think it's a matter of leaders creating that vibe, that invisible vibe on their teams, with their teams.
You've talked about your coaching work. How do you help leaders to go from that position of I've got to have all of the answers to the point where they are able to be more vulnerable, to be able to be open to say, I don't have all of those answers?
Yeah. Well, so when I come in as a coach, I come in very person-centered, very neutral. If I come in as a consultant or a trainer, it's more, okay, I'm the expert and I'm assessing more and things like that. So, but either way, I'll be honest, I have this like stick drawing that I do with leaders. So if you imagine that you drew a mountaintop on a piece of paper, and on top of it, the very peak, you draw a stick figure man. So he has one leg on each side of this little mountain. One side of that mountain, say the right side, is empathy and connection and vulnerability and friendship almost. And on the left side, the other side is authority and vision and protection and boundaries and clarity. And it's like two sides of the same mountain, and leaders have to learn to have a foot in each one and balance them beautifully. And I think that when I work with leaders, and you'll probably recognize this in all of us, we tend towards one side or the other, right?
Yeah.
We tend to be more authoritative people or more like empathetic people, right? So I think for leaders, it's very dependent on which side they favor. And how do we, going back to the fitness analogy, how do we help strengthen those muscles those leadership muscles on the side they tend not to go to, because we need them to be as balanced as possible and be able to go to one side when they need to, go to the other side more when they need to, depending on the situation. So it's really like being a balanced person.
And interesting, because we've mentioned authenticity earlier. And I think that's a challenge, because you're right, we will go to one side of the mountain or the other. But as a leader, you have to develop balance skills, and you have to take your authentic strengths and skills, but also develop the other side so that you can have that balance.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's where the self-awareness comes in, though, right? Is being willing to say, oh, I'm really good at this and I'm not so good at this. For example, for myself as my own small business, there's things I am not good at. So I enlist help in those areas, because there's some areas I'm like, I am not going to spend the time ever to learn how to build a website. Not going to do it. So as a leader, I have to be smart enough to go, hey, what am I really not good at? And I need to get help on. Where am I not good at? And I am not going to get out of this without building that skill. And what am I excellent at? And I can, it's like going into that strengths finder thing, but a bit further. So you end up building the muscles where you need to, delegating where you need to, and hone in and elevating your strengths where you need to. And that can be back to the psych safety thing of where's your team? I had a leader say to me in a coaching session a couple of days ago, she said, I tell my team we are the Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is a cartoon movie chain. I don't know if you're familiar, for children in the US. And each of these turtles is like a karate expert in a different form of martial art. And they have different personalities or whatever. And so her analogy with her team to help them see each other's strengths, different strengths, is that. It was a great analogy that I took with me of like, yeah, we are stronger with different skills and traits, and bringing those in and getting the skills and strengths working and honoring those in our teammates is so crucial. So I think that's true for leaders as well as they develop.
I think Ninja Turtles is a really good description. My team who might be listening are probably laughing, because I've referred to, there were four of us at one point in my leadership team, and I referred to us as four legs of a table. And actually, I think four Ninja Turtles is far better than four legs of a table.
Love that. That's great. Because it could be that too. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And now we're a three-legged table, but we are still steady and we are still strong.
I have a three-legged table in my living room. I absolutely love it. It's from IKEA. It's super cute, retro. Just saying, they can be great too.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Tell us about the principles of the languages of appreciation. What are they? How do we cultivate them? What are they all about?
So the languages of appreciation came out of and I'm blanking on the name, but the author is the same for the 5 love languages. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not.
Oh, okay. So in the US, it's really popular. The 5, like, what's your love language? Is it, and there's 5 of them. It's doing, it's like doing things for, hearing the word, gifts, it's things like that. So that author took that concept and transmuted into what's a business setting and appreciating people in the workplace, because it's really interesting, because there's these really big recognition programs that we have in organizations, and they tend to, when we look at the research on them, they tend to not be as effective, the like employee of the month and things like that, because they're so generic. And so when we look at appreciation and the languages of appreciation, I think is a tool, a tool, they have an assessment you can do that allows you to hone in on each person's preferred language. They call it language of appreciation. And so that'll mean like mine it's called acts of service. So if my husband or my boss wants to do something nice for me, they will actually do a chore for me. That would be like an act of service. A boss would help an employee with a report or a project. Or if it's words of inspiration, like I said, there's 5 of them, and they really just help the leaders hone in on what is each person's preferred language, way of expressing, so that the leader can then save their time, energy, and money on trying to, if they're trying to say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you to someone who doesn't really care about the auditory, then it doesn't land as well. And like we know, all humans want to be seen and acknowledged, and that helps with employee engagement tremendously. So I like to use it as a tool in that regard to help leaders become more aware, and use the platinum rule. The platinum rule they're saying
Tell us
now.
the platinum rule.
Yeah. So the golden rule was treat everyone how you want to be treated. So the new platinum rule is treat everyone how they want to be treated. That kind of idea.
Amazing. I'm quite interested in neurolinguistic programming and how the words that we use have a significant impact. So language of appreciation, I can definitely see how personalizing that appreciation is far more meaningful than if you have a general corporate something or other once a month. Yeah, most definitely. We will make sure we put a link in the show notes to any books that we reference so that listeners and watchers can access them if they want to find out a bit more.
Oh, great.
You talked about employee engagement and culture. How can we use different leadership styles to benefit those different employee engagement? How do we really draw on that and lean into that to make best impact for our people?
Yeah. So the leadership styles, it depends on, I guess, which model you're coming from on that. I tend to go back to that idea of the leader on the mountaintop, and looking at which style, from the leader's mindset, self-awareness questioning, is which style do I need in this moment? There are several leadership styles. Some are more assertive, aggressive, authoritative. Others are transitional leadership, is a little bit more like, hey, here we go. We're going this way. Here's the vision for the company. Some are more coaching style or democratic style. And so I think it's just having the wisdom as a leader, or the self-awareness as a leader, to ask, and maybe the social awareness too, to ask, what is it that we need or I need to be as a leader right now? Do I need to go into a coach approach with this person and talk to them with a more person-centered, or do I need to share in the all staff meeting our vision as we go through this next change? So it's really the leader being able to navigate those different roles, know what they are, know how to do them, and then jump into them. For example, one of the clients I work with is a hospital system, and they're dealing with emergency situations all the time. I don't want my leader going, I'm going to go into my coach, ask them some open-ended questions and reflect back. If it's emergency or you're military, we want that bam, 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 authoritative, do what I tell you to do right now. But if the leader has no money in that relationship bank account with the employees, if they're never doing the coaching or the democratic or the connective building part, that right side of the mountain, then they're going to have a lot harder time keeping employees. If they're always directive, or they're always in that emergency state, they're always dictating, they're going to have a hard time keeping people. So
my colleague refers to situational leadership, and it's something that she knows far more than I do, but I can definitely recognize that in what you're saying, that if you have self-awareness, you recognize where your strengths and your areas for development are, or your weaknesses, and how do you build teams to leverage that to make sure that there is balance across your leadership team. And then you are in that position to amend or respond with your leadership style at a particular point in time.
Right. And to kind of build on what you're saying, it's like, I like Simon Sinek. He says leadership is like parenting. And boy, isn't that true? You have to kind of put yourself out for that I want to say little person, your kid, your person that is your staff. You have to put yourself out for them. You have to do what's best for them. You have to be willing to adopt. Even if you're furious, you're not going to go in screaming. You're going to go in, take a breath, do what you need to do to self-contain. And then you're going to go in as your highest best self, because you care about that person and what happens with them. That's a
And
great.
doing that takes significant self-awareness to
Mhm.
be able to give yourself that moment of calm and
Mhm.
thoughtfulness before responding so that you don't react, that you respond.
Right. Yeah. Amen. Don't react, respond don't react, respond. It's funny you say that because I use that a lot when I'm teaching, is that pause is just pausing can mean the world to your brain physiologically, just giving yourself that. I think they say it's 15 seconds to allow the message to go from, your limbic system to your frontal lobe in your brain so that you can just start to come down a little bit and do what you need to do. But that's huge, is holding that as part of your why almost too, I think.
And that brings us right back to how do we connect physical health and well-being to leadership and the psychology of leadership. And it's right there, isn't it? It's that physiological link that it's in that moment, and you cannot escape it. You have to
Yeah,
consider it.
absolutely. And that thing I mentioned earlier, PNIE, it's very long, psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology. And
Okay.
all it means is your state of mind affects, the proteins, your immune system, your endocrine system. And I think those of us blessed with really good health get to go about our days kind of ignoring some of those signals from our bodies. But self-awareness and being a self-aware, high-functioning leader means that you are considering this vessel, the internal, like where your mind is. And your mind is really not in your brain, right? We know from science now your mind is in your gut. Your mind is floating around in your immune cells. I mean, it's in protein. So it's kind of stepping back and I guess shifting the way you think of yourself as a whole being and the impacts you're having on your health, your people, and the extensions thereof.
Yeah, that notion of whole being, I like that. That's a good phrase to use and to consider, especially for leaders who are maybe in those critical situations and they're dealing with high stress situation. You have to start to think of the
Yes.
whole being.
From self-awareness, if you're not, if you're triggered or stressed, I mean, I think the research is pretty clear that if someone is highly stressed, it's almost impossible for them to be empathetic.
Mm,
So, which leans into exactly what you're saying, is that you have to be self-aware and able to manage your own emotions kindly before you
mm,
can expect yourself to kindly manage anyone else's.
mm. That's definitely something to think about. That I know we talk about self-care and that self-care isn't being selfish, but kindness to self allows you to show kindness to others. And that's
Absolutely.
a really helpful way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your coaching and what skill do you really lean into to be a coach, drawing on all of those different elements that you've learned along the way. What is your coaching USP?
Gosh, I so I guess if you were to look at it from a more objective perspective, I pull from the several different coaching models.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably use a standard. It depends on the situation. I like a standard, ICF coach model of going in and staying really present with the client and coaching them on what they want to work on. But then I like to pull in a little bit of this type of approach called motivational interviewing. Are you familiar?
Yes, it's something that within the early years sector that I work in, we often have health professionals and parenting and family support professionals who will draw on those expertise and those skills.
Yeah. So, okay, great. I'm glad you're familiar because I think MI is an incredible tool to combine. And I take in with my coaching, I'll take in some MI and some like Simon Sinek, Brene Brown, and kind of use a combination because I think one of the disservices we're doing for leaders is we're trying to teach them to coach from a coach perspective, which is
Okay.
you go in neutral, you don't care about the outcome, you're supposed to be very neutral if you're actually coaching. But leaders can't do that. we care about the outcome. We're responsible for the outcome. We need to get this person moving in a better direction sometimes. So I think for me, combining the approach, and when I teach leaders to coach, I teach them a different model, kind of a model that I've created, or not I've created, but I've pulled from multiple people and followed some guru stuff on this. There's a couple gurus I follow on this that have created this very specific, the group is called Milo, however you want to say it, MILO, and it's motivational interviewing and leaderships in organizations.
Oh, right.
And there's a woman there, Colleen Marshall, who's written a book on this with a co-author, but it's very specific, maintaining your leadership, but doing it through a person-centered lens, that coach approach lens. So you're balancing again those sides of leadership. So when you have to set a boundary, you're doing it with like hey, I'm noticing this. Can we talk about it? Instead of, I told you to do this. If you don't do it, you're going to be fired. So it's kind of like taking your child, if we're taking that parenting approach to leadership, and we're noting they're an adult. And people respond much better to inquiries and questions and discussions rather than a top-down power. If you don't do this, you're going to get this. People don't respond to that. They tend to leave that approach. That's why MI works so well, is because it's not that approach, and it lets the person sort of manage their own decisions and supports them in that. So
that really makes sense. I've done a little bit of research into transactional analysis. And as you were saying, that adult to adult relationships, once you start being the parent to child relationship in a work context, people will choose with their feet. Whereas if you've got motivational interviewing, it helps you get back to that adult relationship, doesn't it? There's that curiosity, that conversation.
Yeah. And
sense.
Absolutely. And when we look at what creates that change, behavior change, or a change in someone, it's got to be their own choice.
Yeah.
They're not going to believe what the leader says. Or a lot of times I will coach my leaders on their verbiage, because their verbiage will be like, we'll practice a tough conversation they have to have with a low performing employee. And their verbiage will be like, okay, I need you to, and I'm like, pause.
Interesting.
I need you to is not going to land, especially if the person we're addressing is already showing a little bit of resistance towards doing the regular job, right? So that's when we need to go in a different way. And so that would be more of a like, hey, I'm noticing this. Can we talk about how you think it's landing? So then we get them talking about how they feel they're doing. We ask for permission, can I tell you how I think you're doing? And then we can more gently bring up the topic in a way that they won't throw up the wall right away. And it's more adult to adult. It's less demeaning. And I think with a lot of the retention that many industries are having now, or just even hiring, there's a generation that doesn't want to work as much. And they're more concerned. The research is saying the newer generations are more concerned about what their peers think of their performance than their bosses. So, and the retention. And so back to the appreciation idea, I want not only my leaders knowing the language of appreciation, I want everyone knowing, so that we can all thank Rebecca verbally if she likes that, or with gifts if she likes that.
You mentioned different generations. Are you hearing different demands for different language from different generations? So we hear a lot of people talking about Gen Z and how what they need from the world of work is different from other generations. And I'm not sure I'm 100% comfortable with it, because when we talk about generations, are we pitching different generations against each other? And are we actually creating more friction in the workplace? But I'm wondering, does that play out in practice?
Well, I'm not sure I have the wisdom to speak so much on it, but I would say I've heard some people say it's not generation, it's stage of life.
That makes sense.
I think there's some truth to that, but I also think it's generational. I notice things about people. I'm Gen X, and I notice stuff about my generation. We really associate really well with the boomer mentalities of you show up, you get your work done, don't give anybody any gruff, you just do it, right? Whereas some of the younger generations are like, I want to enjoy my job and you can't talk to me that way and this and that. So as I look at it, when, and we've never had so many generations in the workplace at once.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting thing. I just read this a month or two ago, that the boomers are not retiring either.
That's right. The cost of living means people have to stay in the workplace longer. Yeah.
Yeah. So guess what we're going to have for the next 10 years, 5 more years? We're going to have this really mixed, and I think post-COVID and remote and these multiple generations, we haven't seen this before. And I think I want to say I have a lot of empathy for leaders. I know a lot of people don't, but oh my gosh, it's never been a harder time to be a leader with the demands that are on you and the almost like you have to be a coach, an accountant, you got to have multiple generations and manage everything. You have to be very good with like not laughing or having, like we talked about earlier, you have to be spot on. And we see these record numbers of CEOs retiring now because I think, at least in the US, there's been some reports the last month or two that more people are leaving from the upper levels than ever, because I think it's related to some of these demands.
I wonder whether we will see an interest in a new kind of leadership style. Will there be something where we're talking about leadership for multiple generations in the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? Because you're right, we will have multiple generations in the workplace. It sounds like a book, doesn't it?
I was just going to say, I'm like, here's your next book, Nia, which by the way, congratulations on your new book. I can't wait to read it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it.
So maybe that's book
fun?
2.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because one of my big draws into this field is I do feel like we're on the precipice as we have these tremendous advances in tech and AI, and we see this increased emotional inflammation across the globe and polarization. And we just see these, at least in my world, I see this tremendous, even like my mom might worry about something that she didn't before, and people fight on social media. And you just, sometimes I think a lot of people are like, whoa, what's going on? What is going on in our world right now? We're seeing the effects in business, right? All these tension and yada, yada. I think we're on the precipice of a new era. Like we had the Industrial Revolution. Yeah. We're in the information age. And because of need, I think we're entering a new phase where we are going to have to do the social and relational intelligence era, where we either really get into this stuff and learn how to be self-aware and practice EQ and practice different types of communication with every generation, or we're going to be in big trouble.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I'm having more and more conversations about the world of work, and the future of the world of work is very much high tech, cutting edge AI, IT, and humanized humans. It's almost as if we are on that spectrum, and we want the two things that are at both the furthest reaches of those spectrums, that we want humans to be empathetic, we want them to be caring, yet we want the IT and the tech to be as high tech as it possibly can be. And that conversation is quite interesting because that they are poles apart, but we have to learn to do both.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that too, because for me, I'm sort of like emotionally intelligence wise, we're like toddlers. We're still screaming at each other and blowing stuff up and threatening. And we're going to develop AI that can manage, missiles. It's a little scary to me. Like you're giving a 4-year-old a bus.
Yeah.
To me, it's a little bit of a wake up call right now, I think, for us. And I think it starts with us, like every leader in every organization, every one of us, you, me, is practicing some of this stuff that we're talking about. Just pausing, right? Just pausing before you respond so that you don't react. Taking a moment to take your own pulse before you say anything. Keeping in mind, what is my goal for this conversation, for this person? Can I put my ego back there and say, hey, I understand. I've made a mistake here too. Let me help you out. You know what I mean? Just practicing all the stuff we talk about is the key.
There is so much to think about, isn't there? If we want to be effective leaders and we still want to be effective in the world of work in 5 years, 10 years, and 15 years.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think it hasn't settled yet, right? Like, I
No.
think a lot is still in flux. And I
Yeah,
think
I
with
think you're right.
AI and things that are going on, it's either going to be one of those things like, oh, no, we're really not that far along. Like my husband's in tech and he's like, we're 20 years away from self-driving cars. He's like, don't get excited because
Mm.
it's not happening anytime soon because everyone has to have a self-driving car for
Yeah.
the self-driving car to work, right?
Yes,
They all have
absolutely.
to.
That's exactly what my husband says too.
So sometimes I wonder, okay, are we getting too excited about AI because it's really not as close as we think? We know we have some language models, but
Mm.
are the thinking models really, up and coming? I personally, I feel like we're way too focused on STEM. When we have kids that cannot have a freaking conversation, or we have big companies training their new college graduates on how to socialize,
Mm.
hello, like we need some inner development, right? A lot of the
Yeah.
problems we're seeing are because we aren't working on self-awareness, other
Yeah.
people awareness, good communication skills. How do you manage your emotions? To me,
Yeah.
it's get the 4-year-old out of the bus, get some adults driving.
Yeah.
And that means all of us, developing those skills.
And polarization really underpins that because we are, as different groups of humans, we are in very different places, aren't we? There
Yeah.
are some people who are highly intellectual, who are doing the AI stuff, the people who absolutely understand the emotional stuff. And we're very polarized. And my concern is that we're moving further apart as those groups.
Yeah. And that, I think that's mine too, is that I think it's going to require a little more action on behalf of like our governments to start
Mm.
implementing SEL in schools,
Yeah.
for people to be willing to start practicing little elements of it. And, it's not easy. It's a different type of thing. We're not used to it. And you can't just read about it, right? You have to
Yeah.
actually do it. So
Yeah.
then again, so I'm hoping MI is going to help with some of this stuff. And there's another tool that I want to mention. It's Safe Conversations.
Mm.
And they also have a business element called, and they're more of like a program, a brand, but I like to use them because they have this, it's a structured dialogue. So
Mm.
you don't have to really know what you're doing to follow it and to have a really eye-opening, emotionally intelligent, self-developing conversation with another person. Really helpful. I think if people are like, I don't know what to do. What do I do? How do I have a conversation, that works? I would definitely turn people, right?
Just before we go,
Mm.
3 top well-being or relational skills that you think that leaders are going to need for this future that we're all heading to at the rate of knots.
Yeah. Well, I think that the things I would say are pretty broad. The first would be immaculate self-care.
Mm.
Immaculate self-care. And that meaning not that you're working out 5 days a week, but that you are like spiritually self-caring, you're psycho-emotionally self-caring, you're physically self-caring, and you're relational self-caring. The Harvard Men's Study, which is just one of the longest running studies in history, when they took out race and socioeconomic status and everything, what it came down to is quality of relationships,
Yeah.
had the longest, happiest lives. So that's something to consider. Also, I think the second thing I would say is just emotional intelligence overall, and that is a big thing, but specifically self-awareness, I think at the deepest levels can hit on a lot of the EQ bases. And then last but not least, I would say what we've mentioned today, person-centered approaches to conversation, those coach approach, the MI, the safe conversations. So those, just learning that. So taking good care of yourself, learning the EQ, practicing it, and then learning how to do those type of conversations would be my top 3. And that what I work on myself all the time. It's not an arrival, it's a process, right? So
Absolutely, it's a journey, as per the name of the book, The Self-Awareness Superhighway.
yes, yay.
Almost as if we planned it.
Right?
Lisa, it's been absolutely brilliant having this conversation with you. I think we've really touched on so many different things, from the workplace to society to the future of the globe. So it's been really great having the conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun. Thanks, Nia.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode, where we aim to develop self-aware leaders around the globe to generate kinder, more respectful and creative working relationships through reflection, recognition and regulation. Head over to my website at knowingselfknowingothers.co.uk to sign up to my newsletter to keep up to date with my blog, podcast and book. Looking forward to having you on my learning journey.